Something is awakening inside of Black women, a quiet but undeniable knowing that we're meant for more than survival, more than sacrifice, more than endurance, more than carrying everyone else's expectations while putting our own dreams on hold. A realization that the life we've been taught to accept may not be the life we're meant to live, and that there may be more freedom, more peace, more joy, and more possibility available to us than we've ever imagined. Because once you realize you have options, everything changes. Close your eyes and imagine living a life you love, unapologetic and unbothered, free from daily microaggressions from Karens and Kens, free from the fear of police brutality and systemic racism. Wouldn't that feel amazing? Now open your eyes. What if I told you that it's possible? Hear inspiring stories and get the actual blueprints from brothers and sisters of the diaspora who are living out their wildest dreams abroad. You've heard the term, now be inspired by the movement. I'm Krishan Wright, and this is Blaxit Global. And we are back. Welcome to Season 7 of the Blaxit Global podcast. Woo! Man, it feels good to be back on the mic, and I'm super excited not only to kick off the season, but with whom I'm kicking the season off with. So I have the pleasure of talking to one of our Passport members who's also attended the Move to Portugal Virtual Summit, who's also been on our YouTube channel, who is also an amazing human being. She's a corporate storyteller, former journalist, and writer who is passionate about being a global citizen. I am going to have what I know will be a wonderful conversation with none other than Maureen Jenkins, who's joining me from Amsterdam.
Hey, Krishan. Thanks for the invitation.
I am so grateful you're here. So you are from Chicago originally. As much as I love getting to unpack where people are at present, I feel like there's so much you can glean from a person's backstory because there's those like little nuggets that kind of, contribute to where they are in the world in present day. So for you, Maureen, share a little bit with us about your backstory.
Well, let's see. Like I said, I grew up in Chicago, went to university at Northwestern, about 45 minutes north of the city, and spent my early career as a newspaper journalist covering fashion and music and stuff like that. Ended up going to seminary, getting a religion degree to become a religion reporter. And then I was in Phoenix, didn't like that, and decided I got to get back to Chicago. And instead of going back into a newspaper job, I went into corporate communications. And that started me down a whole path that ended up leading to me working for Boeing, the airplane company. And that is where I fell in love with doing and covering international business and international topics, got a chance to travel the world with the job that I had in internal communications. So I was writing for the company magazine, which let me go literally all over the world and talk to our customers in both on the defense side as well as on the commercial airplane side, which all of us know because we all fly their planes. And so that's, I think that being in that role gave me the exposure that I really needed. I had traveled abroad before, not a lot, but it really, really set me on the course that I think I have been on all these years now to end up, 23 years later, I think, in Amsterdam. So it's been quite a journey, literally a journey around the world. And it has been amazing, just getting started.
Yeah, I love that. And when you talked about going to seminary, I'm like, I don't think I really remembered that part of your story. Mm-hmm. What was it about storytelling or the written word that really captured you?
Well, I actually come from a family of writers. My mom's uncles are published authors. And so, I think you inherit a lot of things about your personality and about the skills that you have that are God given that can hone and you can develop. And I was always a good writer. From the time I was a little kid, I remember, I think I was about 6 or 7 years old and wrote a story called The Talking Hot Dog or something crazy. I was in grade school. And I think it's true that kids, whatever they get positive reinforcement for, is what they tend to develop and work on and become really, really good at. And so, if I do say so myself, I was a very good writer, and I always worked on like the school newspaper in grade school and in high school, and at Northwestern, I wrote for the Black student newspaper. I mean, so that sort of thing continued. I was a journalism major at Northwestern as well, and that set me on the path. But I think the thing that's been the connective tissue with my whole career has been, as you said, telling stories and doing it through the written word. And now, with the corporate job that I have working for a multinational food and beverage company, I still do a lot of storytelling. Some of it is through video scripts and things like that, but that has been the common thread. It's what I love. I used to have travel blog and share stories that way as well. So yeah, it's been wonderful. It's something I love to do personally. I'm working on a little short story collection that is travel themed, a little autobiographical fiction that someday is going to see the light of day when I can stop working so hard. But it is something that I love to do both personally and professionally, and it has allowed me to to create a good living, and I love it. Being a writer, I've always kept journals from the time I was like a kid, a teenager. And it's always fun for me, even now, to go back and look way back at what I used to write about and those things, those formative moments and those experiences that happened to me that set me down a path that I never knew would necessarily take me where I ended up. And I remember going on my first solo trip, and this was the summer of 2001. So again, this is before 9/11, before the world completely changed. Everything still felt very open and free. And I went by myself to, I believe it was to Napa Valley. And I remember I'd gone and stayed at a winery, and it was such a great experience because all my expat experience have been solo. I've gone and moved by myself. And so that gave me such freedom and such like, wow, this is great. And I remember I was staying at a Hotel Bohème in Little Italy in San Francisco as part 2 of my little solo trip. And there was a Jack Kerouac festival happening in Washington Square Park. And so I was like, there's a famous bookstore there in the city called City Lights. And I was just like, I'm going to just do this whole literary weekend kind of thing. So I was going to go back to my hotel and change because, I was just looking kind of, not completely crazy, but not as cute as I would have liked. So I was like, yeah, I should probably go back. But then I walked through the park and I saw this festival. So anyway, I sat on a park bench and I met this Italian guy. This young Italian guy named Andrea. He started talking and chatting, and I just saw him, and it felt like a movie. You know how you like see somebody and you're like, oh my goodness, who is that? Who is that? I know he's younger than me, but who is that? And so anyway, we ended up chatting and talking and spent the whole day and evening together. It was magical. And I remember, again, looking back at my diary, but what I remembered about that was he was traveling the world. He was 25 at the time, and he was just traveling the world. He was living in this place for 3 months. He'd been to university, and then he was working on filmmaking and stuff like that. But he'd live in a place for 3 months and get a job at an Italian restaurant. That was his thing. Everywhere he would go, because he was Italian, he knew he could speak the language, and he spoke English, but not super, super fluently. But he would always go and get a job at a restaurant. And he would just move from place to place, and he would do that. And I was like, wow, I love that. I want to be like that. Here he's like 8 or 9 years younger than me, but I'm like, I want to be like that. I want that kind of freedom to move around the world and find a way to just see the world and make a living as you go. And so anyway, here I am with early 30s with a mortgage and responsibility and corporate jobs. And I'm like, ugh, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. And so that stayed with me. And that that experience with Andrea, and then meeting up with him in various cities around the world, in New York and Milan and Rome, and different things like that over the years. But that really was made up an impression on me. The fact that you could live the life you wanted by creating it and traveling and seeing the world. And so that kind of got me started on the journey. And then a couple years later, I saw the movie Under the Tuscan Sun, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners will remember. And it was about an American divorcee who went overseas to Tuscany and in an attempt to heal her heart, typical Hollywood stuff. She goes and buys this villa in Tuscany, of course, meets a series of hot Italian guys. And then just, it ends up changing her life. And I was like, I want to be like that too. And so and this is again, while I'm working for Boeing, that kind of set me on the path of, you know what? My life may not be a Hollywood story, but I can create my own happy ending. And so that got me talking to the company about moving overseas or doing a stint at least abroad. And when it didn't happen, I finally decided I was going to quit. In 2004, I quit my job. And I, prayed about it before I left, but I told my boss, this is something I really am passionate about. And my boss became my first client. So I still got to do the same work I was doing for Boeing, still writing for the company magazine, but getting paid as a freelancer. And I moved to Florence, Italy.
That is amazing because as I was listening to you tell the story, we're so tethered in the United States, right? Tethered
Mm-hmm.
to a job, maybe tethered to a mortgage or other responsibilities. And then also, as I was listening to your story, and you're talking about this gentleman, working in different restaurants, like we're so conditioned to putting people in a box. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you do this, I'm going to put you in this box that might be higher in my perceived value than
Mm.
this box. And now that I live in Portugal and I'm meeting people from all over the world, different socioeconomic status, etc., and even different jobs, because I would say Portugal is more of a service-based
Mm-hmm.
economy. There's very little of that
Yeah.
categorization, if you will. And it's liberating to
So
connect
liberating.
with people as people versus I'm going to filter how I interact with you, how much time or value I put on you or attribute to you based on what I perceive that you have.
That is so true. It's so true. And that's the thing too, because he was so well traveled,
Mhm.
Andrea, the guy I met in San Francisco, and so smart, I felt like I learned more from him than he would have learned from me, even though I was older. And again, I had the corporate job, but he had been to university and all that. So he was obviously very intelligent, very smart. Not that going to university makes you smart or intelligent, as we know. But I think the fact that he was so well traveled, and that's what I find about people who live in other countries in general, that whatever formal education they may or may not have is made so much stronger because of the life experiences they have had traveling the world. And that's why I have never had an issue dating bartenders or chefs or waiters or guys who do other stuff. It's like, thankfully I can take care of myself, so I'm not looking for sugar daddy per se. So that gives you like you say, the freedom and the liberty to just take people as who they are and for what they can bring to your life and what hopefully you bring to theirs, on the other side. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Let's talk about Florence because I went
Yes.
in December
Firenze.
of 2023 to
Oh,
Firenze and ooh, I fell in love.
it's amazing, isn't it?
It is so
It's
amazing.
like a
Like I
storybook.
can
It's like a storybook.
It is. It's like the beautiful art, and then you have the smell of leather
Oh
right in the
yeah,
air.
everywhere. Everybody's well dressed. The beautiful
Yes.
people, la bella figura. It's like everybody cuts a nice figure.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
The beautiful Duomos, and it's like, oh
Oh,
my
the great
gosh.
food. Oh, it
Yeah.
was amazing. See, I
Yeah.
need to plan a trip back there because I was thinking that the other day. I'm like, I haven't been to Florence in some years. I need to get back there.
How was that first experience, right? That was your first. country living.
Yes, yes. It was wonderful. And I think, and this is one thing that's true, and anybody who's been an expat can tell you this. When you first get anywhere that you wanted to move, it's like a honeymoon. The place can do no wrong. People can be laid and slow. And you're like, oh, that's so charming. They're relaxed, they're laid back. It's like all the stuff that later on is going to drive you crazy is all the stuff that you like. I love it. Just like with the, in early days of dating somebody, all the crazy stuff he does. You're like, oh, that's so cute. That's so charming. Like, so Firenze was like that. Everything was great. And it really was. It was really amazing. I actually had an apartment that was basically around the corner from the Ponte Vecchio, the very famous bridge, where they sell jewelry and all that stuff that people see in postcards and in movies and TV shows and whatnot. And so I was working as a freelance writer and a corporate communications consultant, I guess you would say. So like I said, my boss at Boeing was one of my clients. So I would travel, different places, to Iceland, to Dubai, all these different places to write about our customers and interview people. I also got a chance to do travel and food freelance writing, which I absolutely loved. And I had started doing before I left because I wanted to at least try to get some clients under my belt. So I was writing for Black Enterprise quite a bit, and also the Chicago Sun-Times, which was one of the newspapers where I used to be a fashion writer. And so the other cool thing about that, one of my best friends, Lisa, was the travel editor at the Sun-Times at the time. And then again, I believe in never burning bridges. So even after you leave places, keep good relationships up, keep friendships going and all that stuff. I got a chance to write a travel column called Tales from Abroad. And it was kind of like the play on Tales from Abroad and Tales from Abroad as in overseas. And it was about being a Black American expat during the age of Bush II. So we were in the Iraq War. So, it was an interesting time to be an American and to be an American overseas when you're in the middle of a war that nobody wants, including me. And so every time you get in a taxi, because there was no Uber back then, every time you got in a cab, somebody in broken English would be like, what is going on? Why are you, what is happening with your country? Why are you going home to vote? Isn't there an election in your country? How are you going to vote? Just all that sort of thing. So it was really, really interesting. So I was having my own kind of self-reflection, amazing experience, but then also viewing it through the lens of being an American and being an American first, which is not how we as Black Americans tend to see ourselves. In the States, you're always Black first. And it was interesting in Italy, it seemed like in most cases, you were American first and then you were Black, that's a whole other discussion. But it was, it was just really eye-opening and enlightening. And, it wasn't always easy, because back then, and I think I mentioned this on the YouTube interview, the euro and the dollar were very imbalanced. It's not like it is now. It was like, I think $1.33 to every euro. So literally everything you bought and spent, every glass of red wine, every glass of vino rosso, every plate of pasta, every pair of cute leather boots was, going to cost you that much more, a third more than what you were making. Because I got paid in dollars from American clients and then had to live in the Eurozone. And that was not easy.
Yeah, that's the big thing that people overlook. One of the big things is that you can get seduced by the culture and the vision that you have for yourself. But money makes the world go round. And part of figuring all of that out is, how can I do this and have it be sustainable? Exchange rates fluctuate on a daily basis. And so what might be par today might not be tomorrow.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's so important for people to remember, because I think, when I went, I had some money in the bank, I wasn't rich by any standard, but I thought I had a decent amount because I was still working. It wasn't like I was just, sitting around literally eating cornetti and drinking cappuccinos all day. But you realize how fast your money goes. And it was tough because I actually planned to stay in Florence for at least a year. I went with a permesso di soggiorno, so I had a legitimate freelance visa through the Italian consulate in Chicago. So I'm not trying to go and sneak around and have to be ducking in and ducking out of countries because you can only stay for 3 months. But yeah, I mean, I ended up staying for 7 instead of a year because the money really, really went fast, and I'm not a fan of being broke. So I was like, well, I guess that means I need to go home and get another job. But I think what I realized, I was trying to live like an expat American in Florence rather than a Florentine. And that's the difference. But I also think that when you go to these places, I didn't know anybody in Florence. The friends I had that were Italian, they lived in Rome or they lived in Torino. They didn't live in Florence. So I didn't know people who could tell me about kind of that underground hidden market of apartments where you pay local prices because local people make less than expats. And so the apartment I may have been paying, and I can't remember the exact amount, but if I was paying €1,500 a month for a place, local people were paying 700 or 800 because it was somebody's cousin's friend's brother who had a place, and that's how they found their places to live. And so that is one thing that is always important. Get to know some local people, make some local friends so you can find out about those hidden parts of the economy that help people live very well, but on probably half of what you're spending as an expat.
Oh, 100%. I am now with over a year under my belt here in Portugal. And, in Portugal, you have to have your lease and accommodations even before you get your visa, which most people either go on sites like Idealista or they employ the help of a relocation specialist. But even with that, oftentimes you're paying foreigner expat prices. And it's only after being here some time that you're like, okay, wait, there's a whole other market because I know they're not paying what I'm paying. And you're right. It's like now, if I choose to leave my apartment and go elsewhere, I'm tapping into that hidden market of how do I make more local friends? And I have been fortunate and blessed here where I feel like I have permeated to some degree in certain parts of Lisbon in particular, that hidden market, because again, money is a renewable resource, but at the end of the day, you got to give yourself some runway in order for it to renew.
Absolutely. So it doesn't become a finite resource.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that kind of messes your whole plan up. And so, that's one thing I always encourage people to do, take more money or expect to spend more money than you think because everything costs more, and that's, again, I think as you do this whole expat thing over and over again, or even if you do it once, hopefully you talk to people and you learn. You don't have to always, go through the school of hard knocks, talking to people and finding out what you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. So you don't beat yourself up. But once you know, then it's like, how can I pivot and I can still have a wonderful experience, but save some of my dollars or euros or pesos or whatever your currency is where you live.
We'll be right back.
Building a life overseas is about more than just choosing a country. It's about choosing yourself. That's why I created our newest guide, 7 Questions Every Black Woman Should Ask Herself Before Building a Life Overseas. Get your free copy through the link in this episode or visit blaxitglobal.com. Even though your plan was 1 year and it wound up being 7 months, you didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and say, oh, you know what? It didn't work out. This isn't for me. I'm never going to do it again. It sounds like you were able to go back to the States, kind of regroup, come up with a new strategy and get back out there because now you had 3 other experiences abroad, including your current one. And so what has that been like? Because you've gone to countries where English may be spoken, but isn't the primary language that's spoken. So how has that earlier or first experience allowed you to adapt to other countries?
Yeah, well, the thing about Florence is because it gets so many tourists from all over the world, not just Americans or Canadians, but people from Asia, people from across Europe. And in a lot of cases, English is the only language that they may have at least a little bit in common that they all speak. So and I'm sure you found this, Krishan, when you went to Florence, you can easily find people to speak English. Lots of schools have exchange programs, especially with American universities. So there are American students and British students and Australian students running all over the place. So that makes it tougher, I think, to actually learn Italian and speak Italian unless you make it a concerted effort to every time you go to a store, to a shop, to really practice. And it's such a beautiful language. I think it probably is my favorite foreign language. And it's, not that I'm fluent in any of the ones that I'm trying to speak, but I speak Italian better than the others. And I think, that's again where it's wonderful to meet local friends because they will speak with you and they encourage you. There's none of this, oh, you didn't say that right. I always found in Italy, they were so thrilled that you tried because it's not like Italian is spoken a whole lot of places around the world. It was great. But, I took language classes. That's how I met people. And that was a wonderful experience as well. But one thing that I thought about before I left and went back to the States is moving to a smaller village, moving to a village somewhere, maybe somewhere else in Tuscany, but in a place where there were not a ton of English speakers, where I would be forced to learn the language and be forced to speak it every day and not be able to easily fall back on parla inglese and always asking somebody to switch languages, even if I could start out in Italian and then switch back. So I didn't end up doing that in the end, but I thought about moving somewhere like Lucca or, just someplace that might have a lot fewer English speakers. And I wish I had done that. I don't have a lot of regrets in life, but that's one thing that I do think would have been really helpful in terms of learning the language and also just having a completely different and rich experience. So that was Italy. And then my next expat experience was moving to a village, speaking of villages, a 2,000 person village called Sint Maarten, about an hour south of Paris. And that was a village. So, again, there were people who spoke English because they were expats and there were French people who had lived abroad and traveled and stuff. But yeah, you had to work a little bit harder at the language there because there were a lot of folks who didn't.
I've been to France and I've been to Italy, and I would say the French aren't as forgiving.
Lovely people, but not so
Yeah.
much with their language. It's like, we got a
No,
beautiful
they're
language.
like, look at you like, I know you didn't come up here.
What? I'm switching to English. No.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So like it does sound like you got that village experience, in France.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that you ended up going all the way to St. Martin.
Yeah, yes. And so we're jumping from 2012 when I went to Sint Maarten and was a house sitter, still working again as a freelance
Mhm.
travel and food writer and doing corporate communications writing, to the pandemic in 2021 when I decided to go to St. Martin because I was again working for the same company that I work for now as a corporate speechwriter and ghostwriter and doing that sort of work. And so we had all been sent home in March of 2020. So everybody's working from wherever they're working from. So I realized I'm like, and I'm living in downtown Chicago in my condo, and I'm like, you know what? Why am I sitting here cold? I'm going somewhere else. So I told my boss, I was like, you know what? I'm thinking of going to the south of France for a couple months. Do you mind if I go? He's like, I don't care where you go. Go wherever you want. He's sitting on a golf course in South Carolina. He's like, I don't care where you go. Just go wherever you want. Have fun. And so anyway, my initial plan was to go to the south of France to one of my favorite places, to a village where I actually went for my 40th birthday, which was a very special place. And I was going to stay there for a couple months, but I was leaving the country on January 6th, 2021. We all know what happened that day. And I'm trying to get out of the US, trying to get on my plane to go to France. I was on a flight. I think it was a British Airways flight. I get to London and they wouldn't give me a boarding pass to go to Nice, which is where I was headed. And they said, oh, you don't have the right papers. You don't have the right visa. So they put me back on a plane, back to Chicago after the storming of the Capitol and all the crazy stuff that's happening in the States. I was like, okay. But the one thing that I had done before I went, and I generally am a very optimistic person and I try not to be so much of a fatalist, but I did tell myself, you know what, if for whatever reason this doesn't work out, I'm going to the Caribbean. And I don't know why I thought that, because I never thought I would want to live in the Caribbean. I just knew that there were a lot of islands there that had digital nomad programs, and they were welcoming to Americans who could prove they didn't have COVID, because that's before, the vaccines were widespread and all that stuff. So I was like, okay. So I went back to my travel agent, told him what happened. I was like, okay, can you help me find a place? I want to, I thought maybe Aruba or Curacao, or I didn't know where. Maybe St. Maarten. I had been there once on a travel assignment so many years ago, I didn't remember anything. And I ended up finding an apartment, a beautiful apartment facing the Caribbean Sea in St. Maarten. And I was like, let's do it. And I went. And I was going to stay for, I think, 2 months. But I just fell in love with the place, and it's just, for those of you who know or don't know, St. Maarten is a half Dutch island. Half of it is part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the other half is French. It's a French collectivité. So it's like living, and that the French part does feel more French. And then the Dutch part, because there's so many Americans and English speakers over there, it kind of feels like the States, but you're somewhere else. And they get great beaches. So I fell in love with St. Maarten, and I decided to, extend my apartment lease. And then I met this interesting chef that I was hanging out with from the French side. And, that was fun. And so then I went back to Chicago. And then I decided, you know what? I'm going to come back during the summer to see if I really like it, because it's hotter and humid and it's hurricane season. So I was like, okay, we're going to see if I really like it when the weather is not as perfect. I mean, it's still pretty perfect because it's still like, 80 some degrees and sunny every day. But I thought, well, if I do like it, then maybe I'll consider trying to apply for residency here. And I went back. The summer wasn't as hot and humid as Chicago. So I was like, okay, let's do it. And so I came back in January 2022 and decided to apply for residency.
So you have residency in St. Maarten.
I eventually got it because I worked with an immigration consultant to do that. But it's easier for Americans because there's a friendship treaty between the U.S. and Dutch governments. So
yes, the DAF treaty.
Right? Yes, the DAF treaty. So people are thinking of Plan Bs and other places they may want to go from the States. Just saying. Yeah. The water's warm, as you always say. The water's warm over there.
Yeah. So and look, there are worse places than to be in 80-degree weather facing the ocean in the Caribbean. Hello.
Absolutely.
So what was, we talked about, before we get to Amsterdam, we've talked about some of the places that you've been, some of the people that you've met. You've done this now 4 times as a solo person. Mm-hmm. I've made my leap for 1 country down so far as a solo person. What has been the dating situation? Because I feel like I am in the embryonic stage of this whole adventure to now I've settled in my country. I kind of have a better understanding of not only the lay of the land, but of myself as someone who is an American English speaker who's navigating this new life abroad. What is that situation like, or how have you approached it in the different countries that you've lived in thus far?
Well, it's been really different because my expat experience has spanned 20 years, like literally 20 years as of September, as of last month. So thinking back to 2004, I was obviously 20 years younger. I like to think I haven't changed that much, actually, except maybe a little bit on the weight side, but not too much. But I've always tried to have a relatively open-minded approach to dating. And back then there was no Tinder, there was no Match, there was no Hinge, there was no, all that stuff didn't exist. So if you were going to meet somebody, you were just going to meet them in the wild, in nature, you know. And I remember like, yeah, I would literally meet people out, like walking around or going to a bar or a restaurant. And this guy I dated there, I won't say his name in case he ever listens to your podcast. But he was Italian, and I literally met him walking down the street, and it was so funny because I was like, "Am I on candid camera?" Because this is like a movie, right? Or like a Barilla commercial or something. So I'm walking down the street trying to be cute with my new Italian jacket and my boots and my glasses and all this stuff. And so anyway, so this guy comes up to me and starts chatting, and he's cute, and he's, you know, I'm short, he's kind of short, and so I was like, oh, he's cute, you know, and he spoke English, and we chatted, and he asked me out, and so we started going out, and then, you know, he had this fabulous like convertible and stuff. And I knew, you know, he had a legit job. He had like a legit job and stuff. But, you know, it was fun. It was interesting to, you know, be going out with this guy who was a local. He was Florentine. So he was from there and that knew the city, knew the culture. And, you know, he made good money. So we'd go to nice places and, you know, we'd go up to like Piazzale Michelangelo or someplace and overlook the city or Fiesole or, you know, take day trips to Forte di Marmi or, you know, places on the sea and all that. It was fun, you know, I mean, but obviously I'm still single, so it obviously didn't work out ultimately, but that's okay, right? Everything's an experience for the book or experience for life. So yeah, but that was how I tended to meet people. And I remember there was a chef who was asking me out, but he didn't speak any English at all, like none. And if I had been me now, I would have seen that as a challenge and said, you know what, this is my opportunity not just to eat well at a great restaurant, but to learn some Italian and actually be able to speak it with someone who doesn't speak English. And so that would have been a smart move. So, you know, sometimes guys and gals, sometimes don't let the language barrier stop you. You can figure out how to communicate and actually use that as a way to learn a lot about the local culture, but also to help learn the language. So that was the experience in Italy.
Yeah, and I have to say, one of the things that I am grateful for, even though I wanted to do this move, 20, 30 years ago, is that I do have the benefit of having these, wonderful devices that help you communicate,
Yeah.
because I am like, sometimes on these apps and things, people are writing in their native language.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's German, sometimes it's Russian, sometimes it's Italian, sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese, sometimes it's French. And it's like, okay, I can make out a word or two, or at least what I think, and then I can screenshot it, put it in the app, and like, okay, at least we can
Exactly.
have somewhat conversation.
Right.
And I know people who have had relationships with people who don't speak English at all. And, they've had some longevity to it,
Mm-hmm.
8 months, 9 months. And I'm like, wow, I'm always astounded. Um, but really, there are certain things that kind of transcend language in a lot of
Absolutely.
ways, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Decency, kindness,
Yeah,
foolishness,
exactly.
foolishness.
That's true. There still are clowns.
Clowns in any language are still clowns.
Yeah,
Nice accent,
exactly.
but still clowns.
So let's go and segue into Amsterdam. And
Mm-hmm.
so Amsterdam, at least in my mind, knowing your story, has been very different from the earlier experiences in terms of how you got there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you mentioned when you talked about your decision first to go to Florence was that you had tried when you were at Boeing, you wanted to, really make a case for
Mm-hmm.
bridging your corporate career into a new country, and that proved unsuccessful from a corporate move perspective, to now having this experience working for a multinational food and beverage company from Amsterdam. So, how is it that you were able to make this pivot this time?
Yeah, well, I was working for the same company when I was in St. Maarten. So the good thing is, if, again, the pandemic was like 99.99% terrible, except for the fact that it gave those of us who prefer to work remotely and virtually license to do it. And it proved how well we could do it. We, as like companies, as the world, people who normally sat in offices could do what they did and do it well as long as they had a laptop and a strong Wi-Fi signal. And so it really didn't matter where you were. And the good thing too, because I did a lot of and still do, speech writing and ghostwriting for the company's executives, I knew these people already. So it wasn't like I was hired in and nobody knew who I was. They knew me, they knew my work. I knew their style because I have to obviously write in other people's voices and things like that. So the segue from Chicago to St. Maarten or wherever I happened to be was not going to be as difficult. And so, the company had given me permission to live there. I wasn't pretending. I didn't put up a fake backdrop on my, Teams or Zoom or whatever and pretend I was someplace else. Everybody knew where I was. It was no secret. But at a point, the company felt that I needed to be in a place where we had business offices or business entity from like a more of a tax liability perspective. And so that was where there was a lot of back and forth about, where I would go, because personally, and I have known this for 20 years, I wanted to live abroad. I did not want to live in the States full time or permanently. And that is why the jobs I have taken, especially the corporate jobs I have taken with multinationals, because Boeing is not the only one. The company I work for now is not the only one. Every job I took was with an eye to eventually transferring or getting myself to an overseas office and living there. And so I'm, super grateful and super blessed to be able to have done that and to have made that pivot. So moving from St. Maarten to Amsterdam, I was given a choice of a few of our world headquarters locations, which included Toronto and London. And so I love both Toronto and London, but I was like, Toronto's too cold and London went through Brexit and I don't really feel like dealing with their National Health Service, which is, things are not always so great there as much as I love visiting. And so I had been once to Amsterdam when I was working for this same company, just on a work trip 5 years ago when I talked my boss into letting me do a developmental assignment, quote unquote, working from Europe. So I could, for a couple months, so I could visit some of our offices and factories and understand the company's business, which was true. That is what I wanted to do. But I also did want to go and spend time in Italy and in France and in the UK and all that good stuff. And so I really enjoyed my time in Amsterdam, but I never had it on my bingo card that this might possibly be a place that I would end up living. And so it's like life is really fun that way, right? You don't always know what's ahead or what's around the corner. That can be good and bad, but in this case, it has been wonderful. I've been here about a month and a half. It's been really, really cool. I mean, there's some frustrating things already, like some of the healthcare stuff. But once I know once I get it all settled and once I get it all figured out, it's going to be great. But it's a wonderful place to live. It's very diverse. There are lots of Black folks, lots of people from Indonesia, and just people from literally all over the world. And that in itself, being in an international environment in a city in Central Europe where you can literally go to the airport and go anywhere in the world is just like, I just feel like I hit the jackpot.
You mentioned before about that honeymoon stage when you're in
Mm-hmm.
a new country, and it sounds like you're experiencing some of that with a little bit of challenge because you said, "Oh, the healthcare, but it's okay. It's gonna
But
work
look
out,
at
right?"
reality. A little
You're
bit
still
of
on that honeymoon,
reality.
like it's
Yeah.
okay. Like
Yeah.
me with the 205 days to get my residency card. It's like it'll show up. It's no big deal. I'm out of America.
Exactly. It's all good, right?
Right? It's all
It is
good.
all good and it's all going to work out. But that's the thing, too. I think there is something that to be said for the wisdom of being a little older
Mhm.
because you do realize that things are going to be fine. And I have been through this. Like I said, this is my fourth expat experience, and each one has had its challenges. Some have been similar to others, some have been completely different, some I wouldn't have expected, but I know it's going to be fine. And you just have to learn. Sometimes you just have to step back and breathe. And I think for me as a type A Capricorn control freak, it's very hard to do that because I'm just used to trying to make stuff happen and thinking I'm in control when I'm really not. So, you just take a breath, say a prayer, chill out.
So how have you been, I know with now a month and some change under your belt, how have you been able to make friends or community there?
Yeah, well, one thing that I have done here, and this is where being a, 4-time expat does come in handy, because you think back about how did I meet people in the other places where I lived? What did I do in order to kind of start feeling settled and find those people? Again, back in my Florence days, there weren't, or not that I was aware of, at least, were these groups where it was like, Black in Portugal or internations or places where you could go both in person and online to make or build community with fellow expats or people who had moved to whatever place you were from around the world. And so you had to, especially when you work at home, because that's the thing. As an expat, I have always worked primarily at home. And so I'm also an introvert, which no one believes. But what I have to do is put myself out there. So one thing that I would do, and I was thinking about that today, yes, I've got a lot of stuff I need to do because I got to take a trip later this week. I could just stay at home all day, but you have to put yourself out there. Go and have lunch. Go and have a coffee. Go and have dinner at a restaurant. That gets you out talking to people, meeting people. Sometimes maybe that becomes people that are fellow diners in a restaurant. Maybe it's the servers or the bartenders or the chefs. I've made a lot of friends in different countries actually by doing just that. I also think it's important to find those things that you like to do and do them in your new place, knowing that it's going to be a little different. So, I like to do yoga. So what I have done is, especially in the past several years. So when I went to Sint Maarten, again, it was during the pandemic. There were no vaccines. I was like, I want to find a yoga studio, but I want to find one where they practice outside, because that's the beauty of living on an island where it's warm all the time. And so I found this wonderful yoga studio where they practiced outside and they were right overlooking a lagoon. So it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. You're doing yoga, full moon yoga at the beach, all this stuff where you're in the open air where you felt safe, but you could also meet people. So I got one of my best friends in Sint Maarten is a girl named Steph. And I met her because she was my yoga instructor. And there was one time that I was the only student and we said, let's blow this off. Let's go get some pizza and some wine. And that's what we did. And then we've been great friends since then. And so and I've met people through her. I've also found that it's great to let other people that back home know where you're going. And once they do, everybody's like, you know what? I got a cousin who used to live in St. Maarten. Let me see who she knows. Or I've got a friend who works in Paris. Let me connect you to her. I've got somebody, that I know, or whoever, that's in Amsterdam. Let me put you in touch. And now it's so much easier than it was when I started out as an expat, because there weren't all these digital tools and all these online communities and things like that. So I think being able to find people even before you get where you go. And then if some people you're going to hit it off with, some you won't, but that's okay. A lot of times those people will then introduce you and connect you to other people who you might have more in common with, or who you might feel a little bit more simpatico with, and that turn into great friends. And I don't know, I guess I just always believe that not everybody has to be your best friend to be a nice connection, and you can be that for them as well. So, I think you have to be intentional. That's what I will say. That is the key. Be intentional about finding those places and finding those people. And, another thing that I do is I like to try to find a church where I go. I go every week, that's important to me. And also in the places that I've gone, I look for English speaking churches. I'm an Episcopalian, and Anglican churches are basically everywhere. And that's the Church of England. So I know they're going to speak English when I get there. So that, again, gives you an opportunity to meet people, to be able to ask questions that you've got about your new place and your new community. and all that stuff. So it's, again, I think finding whatever that is, whatever your thing is, and then even being willing to just kind of step outside of what you normally do and say, well, I haven't played chess, but maybe I want to take it up now. Maybe that's a way for you to also meet folks that you might have something in common with.
That's great advice for anyone, right? Like as they're settling in, you can have your routine, but then what are those things that you either always wanted to do or you were curious about? Like this time is your time to do that without a lot of the constraints and hangups from your home country because
Mm-hmm.
most cases you're going somewhere where you don't know many people or don't have familial ties. So it
Mm-hmm.
is the closest thing to tabula rasa that you're probably ever going to get. So I love that advice. And so for you, now that you've done this, and I would imagine your family is used to you traversing the world, how do you preserve and maintain those familial connections given that you tend to go to far off places? How are you able to stay connected to your family?
Yeah, well, I'm really close to my nuclear family, to my mom and dad, who are just like the most wonderful people ever. And they are raising my dog, Buddy, in the suburbs of Chicago. And then my sister and brother in law, who I love to death. And they're not too far from my parents. And so I think, again, back to being intentional. I talk to them probably every few days, every couple days, or if my mom hasn't heard from me in 3 days, she's like, hey, Riri, we haven't talked to you. Just making sure everything's okay. Haven't talked to you in a while. And for some people, they may go weeks and months without talking to family. But that makes me feel great knowing that an ocean away, people are still concerned and checking in, and they know I'm here by myself. And so, and my mother is like big on my mom and my sister. We want a list of contact names. We want a list of people that over there, or, whether it's the realtor, whether it's a soror, whether it's somebody, tell us somebody that if we needed to find you, or if we had to get on a plane and come find you, or we need to get in touch with somebody because we haven't talked to you, we need to know where you are, or somebody who would, might have a regular touch point with you or could get in touch with you. And so that has been one thing that I have done. I've also, my dad, he's a globetrotter too. And so I've been fortunate. And my mom, used to do a lot more as well. But, they would come and visit. My sister and brother-in-law, they all, they came to Florence. My dad came to France. He went to Sint Maarten 3 times. He's the only one. He got on a plane, came over there. But that was wonderful too, because I think what's wonderful is also to let your family see how you're thriving in a place, because otherwise it all feels kind of like hypothetical. You talk about it, you maybe show a video of your apartment, you show some pictures and things like that. My family's not on social media a ton, and I'm not on as much as I probably should be. So they don't see all of the pictures of you doing this and doing that. They just hear about it. But I think it's wonderful when at least somebody from your family comes and like experiences your new home through your eyes. And then if nothing else, they can go back and say, she's all right, she's good. So then they don't have to worry so much, but I do think it's, and friends often for us, especially those of us who are single, our friends become our family. So I also include that in the sense of having people who you just adore, having them come and visit. Like one of my dear friends from Chicago, Jean, was just here and we had a ball hanging out in Amsterdam, and then we went to Paris. And I think what's wonderful too for both of us is to experience this whole expat journey she's looking at it through her own lens, and I'm looking at it through her lens looking at me. You know what I mean? It's a very interesting thing. And I always say you just never know how you're going to get inspired or where inspiration's going to come from, because I do think another seed was planted for me. Back in 1998, one of my friends was working on an army base in Germany as a social worker. He and I used to be newspaper reporters together in Illinois. And he left journalism, went into social work, and ended up working on an army base. And he was having the time of his life. And he told me to come visit. And I was like, you don't have to tell me twice. That's why I always tell people, if you don't want visitors, don't tell Maureen, because I will buy a plane ticket in a second. And so I went and hung out with him in the town where he was on the army base. We got a chance to go to Frankfurt, then we went to Strasbourg, and then we went to visit a friend of his, another American expat who was living in Paris with a view of the Eiffel Tower. And I was like, I want to be like both of y'all when I grow up. I want to be like both of you. And again, these are guys, and they had very different lives, but I was just like, they are making it work, and they are killing it. This is what I love this, and I didn't think at the time that I want to do this right now, but I think the seed was planted. So a few years later, when I met Andrea in San Francisco and then went to Boeing, and I specifically wanted to interview with Boeing because they were a global company. And so I was like, when I go back and I look at my journal, I see that I literally had written that right after I met Andrea, I had the interview with Boeing. And I was like, how fortuitous is this? And it just sets you on the path. And that's my point, that, again, we never know who's going to be inspired by our journeys. And that's why if you've got younger nieces and nephews or cousins or, even older people, there's nothing that says you can't move in retirement. We know people do it all the time. So get your friends and get your family to come and visit. You just never know what seeds might be planted for them and where they may end up flourishing and going someplace else as an expat. So.
Yeah, it is so true. This through line in your story has been intentionality, both in the way in how you approached the strategy of the companies that you chose to work for and work with, and also how you keep up with your family, and then representation, understanding that earlier seed that was planted with seeing your friend in Germany is like, oh, wow, it led you to this point and that point. And that was like the seed of inspiration. Because when you're telling your story, and, whether it be, on the podcast or in other different mediums, you don't know the inspiration that somebody else is gleaning from that situation that can then put them on a path. And so that's why I know this platform and this podcast is so important to document and detail the narratives and the movement of Black expats wherever we are in the world. And so with that, I'm very appreciative for you to be here and sharing your story with us.
Yes, and I am so appreciative to you because I first heard you on Exodus Summit and then found out about Blaxit Global. And then that's when I became a Passport member and just started watching you on YouTube and everything. And you have been such an inspiration. And so, again, like you say, you just never know what is going to touch people and what's going to inspire them, whether they're thinking about being expats or whether they're a 4-time expat like me. It's just great to keep that inspiration going and be surrounded by people like you who are exhorters and encouragers. And it just means a lot. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. And so as we close, Maureen, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Maureen Jenkins, in Amsterdam. Just updated that. Also on Instagram and Facebook at Urban Travel Girl 40. And Urban Travel Girl used to be my blog moniker. So that's why I picked it up and kept it going, even though the blog is dormant for the moment. I'm going to restart that at some point soon too. But Urban Travel Girl 40 is my Instagram handle and also how I can be found on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, definitely y'all tap in, get connected. Maureen is an inspiring woman and you want to follow her for sure. So with that, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Blaxit Global podcast. I look forward to us doing our in-person thing again, hopefully in Amsterdam.
Absolutely. Or Firenze or the south of France in Nice.
Yes.
Have passport, we'll travel. You know us.
Thank you for listening to the Blaxit Global podcast. For more information on today's episode, be sure to visit our website at blaxitglobal.com. It's not only possible to live out your dreams unbothered and in full color, it is your birthright. This episode of the Blaxit Global podcast is sponsored by Blaxit Global Passport. At some point, the question stops being, can I move abroad and becomes what's possible for my life. Passport is where Black women from around the world come together to explore new possibilities, navigate life abroad, and create lives that feel bigger than the ones they were told to settle for. Because the goal was never just to move. The goal is to expand what feels possible. Visit blaxitglobal.com and click community to begin your next chapter.